I died, and what Jesus revealed about fasting completely changed my life forever. My name is Elizabeth Kane, and I was never one to believe in grand spiritual transformations. I lived a structured life as a nutritionist in Denver, Colorado, focusing on what I could see, measure, and explain. Fasting had always been part of my routine, not for any spiritual purpose, but as a tool for health. It helped reset my body, clear my mind, and improve my overall well-being. Yet, deep inside, I carried an uneasiness, a lingering question. Was there a deeper power behind fasting that I was missing? That question began to gnaw at me more persistently when I attended a church service one Sunday morning. The pastor spoke with such conviction about fasting as a spiritual practice that breaks barriers, moves mountains, and aligns us with heaven's purposes. I listened, half skeptical, half intrigued, as he called on the congregation to join a 10-day, water-only fast. He said this was a way to seek clarity, breakthrough, and spiritual alignment. I remember thinking, could something so simple hold so much power? For days, I wrestled with the idea, fasting for health? That was easy for me. But fasting as a spiritual discipline felt foreign and, honestly, unnecessary. Yet something about the pastor's words stayed with me. By the end of that week, I decided to give it a try, not out of deep faith, but because I needed answers. I had been feeling stuck for months, unsure about my faith, my career, and my direction in life. This fast, I hoped, would bring clarity, or at least give me the focus to figure things out. By the 8th day of the fast, my body was weak, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. I felt lighter, more connected, and strangely at peace. That evening, as I biked home from a prayer meeting, I reflected on the experience so far. For the first time in years, I felt like I was on the verge of something significant, though I didn't know what. And then it happened. A car swerved suddenly into the bike lane, and I had no time to react. The impact threw me off my bike, and everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't on the street anymore. I was somewhere else entirely, somewhere that words can barely describe. When I woke up, the world felt both familiar and foreign at the same time. The sterile white walls of the hospital room, the beeping monitors, and the faint scent of disinfectant reminded me of where I was. A nurse hovered nearby, adjusting the IV drip attached to my arm. My body felt heavy, as if weighed down by gravity itself, but my mind raced with a clarity I couldn't explain. The memories of what I had experienced were vivid, almost too vivid. It was like trying to hold on to sunlight with your hands, something so real but impossible to fully grasp. I wanted to close my eyes and return to that place, but as soon as I did, the stark contrast of reality pulled me back. My heart ached with the weight of what I had seen, but I couldn't even begin to form the words to describe it. "Welcome back," the nurse said gently, her smile kind but professional. "You gave everyone a scare, but you're stable now. The accident wasn't as bad as it could have been." She paused, as if weighing whether to add more, then continued. "Your heart stopped for over 12 minutes. But somehow, you're here. You're lucky. Lucky." The word felt so hollow. I wasn't here because of luck. I knew that. But how could I explain what I had seen to someone who wasn't there? I nodded weakly, not trusting myself to speak. The next few days passed in a haze of medical assessments and concerned visits from friends and family. My sister Emily came every day, her face a mixture of relief and worry. "You scared the life out of me, Liz," she said, holding my hand tightly. "You're like a cat with 9 lives. But seriously, what happened out there? Do you even remember?" I hesitated. How could I begin to tell her? The words sat on the edge of my tongue, but fear held them back. What if she didn't believe me? What if she thought I was imagining things, or worse, losing my mind? So, I lied. Just a little. It's all kind of a blur, I said, forcing a smile. I remember biking and then nothing, just waking up here. She seemed satisfied with that answer, but I wasn't. I had seen something that had shifted something deep inside me. And though I couldn't explain it, I felt its ripple effects everywhere. Even small things seemed different now. The world felt more alive, more vibrant. The sunlight streaming through the hospital window seemed warmer, as if it carried a message I couldn't quite decode. The sound of Emily's laughter, the gentle rustling of the trees outside, even the rhythm of my own breathing. It all seemed to hold a deeper significance. But it wasn't just the world around me that had changed. I noticed subtle shifts within myself too. My thoughts felt clearer, like a fog had lifted. I could sense things I hadn't paid attention to before. A nudge here, a whisper there. It was as though I had become attuned to something beyond the physical, something I couldn't see but could undeniably feel. One afternoon, while waiting for the doctor to check in, I sat by the window, staring at the sky. A sudden thought struck me. What if that experience wasn't meant to be kept to myself? But as quickly as the thought came, so did the doubts. Who would believe me? I wasn't some spiritual guru or prophet. I was just Elizabeth Kane, a nutritionist from Denver. What if people thought I was exaggerating or, worse, delusional? I decided to keep it to myself, at least for now. Maybe, with time, the memories would fade, or I'd find the right way to share them. But deep down, I knew they wouldn't fade. They weren't the kind of memories that could be forgotten. Even as I tried to push it aside, reminders of the experience seemed to follow me. When I returned home, I found myself drawn to moments of stillness, almost as if I were searching for traces of that otherworldly realm in the ordinary. One day, as I watered the plants in my kitchen, I noticed a single droplet of water clinging to a leaf, catching the sunlight just right. It refracted a rainbow of colours, so delicate yet so vibrant. For reasons I couldn't explain, that tiny moment brought me to tears. It was as though I was being shown that even in the smallest, simplest things, there was a kind of divine beauty. Other moments were harder to explain. I'd find myself thinking about someone, a colleague I hadn't spoken to in months, or an old friend I'd lost touch with. And within hours, they'd call or send a message out of the blue. It wasn't coincidence, I was sure of that. Yet, despite these subtle affirmations, doubt still lingered. Was I overanalyzing everything, or was there truly something at work here? The skepticism I had carried for years wasn't so easily shaken. But no matter how much I tried to reason it away, the feeling persisted. There was more to this life than I had ever allowed myself to believe. At night, when the world grew quiet, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the memories in my mind. The brilliance of the light, the warmth of his presence, the words that had been spoken to me. They were all etched into my soul. And yet, I still couldn't bring myself to share them, not even with Emily, not even with myself out loud. I didn't know what was happening to me or where it was all leading, but one thing was clear. I couldn't go back to the way things were. Something had changed, and whether I was ready or not, I knew I had to figure out what it all meant. 3 months passed, and life moved forward in ways that felt both ordinary and extraordinary. I had returned to my routines, but everything seemed subtly different. The memories of my near-death experience lingered like a melody I couldn't forget. I couldn't explain it to anyone, not fully. Still, the pull to dive deeper into my faith and the mysteries I had glimpsed continued to grow. It was during this time that I heard about a 7-day prayer and fasting retreat being held at a small church an hour outside of Denver. At first, I hesitated. 7 days of fasting and prayer felt intense, almost intimidating. But something inside me urged me to go. Maybe it was curiosity, or perhaps it was the quiet whisper I had learned to recognize, a nudge in my spirit, gentle yet insistent. The retreat began on a crisp Saturday morning. A small group of us gathered in the modest church, surrounded by pine trees and the cool mountain air. The retreat leader, Pastor Jonathan, spoke about surrendering ourselves completely to God. His words were simple but powerful, and they resonated with the quiet longing I had carried since my accident. The days that followed were a mixture of stillness and struggle. The physical challenge of fasting was undeniable, especially as the hours stretched into days. My body protested, reminding me of how much it relied on the comforts of food and routine. But alongside the physical discomfort came a strange, almost unexplainable clarity. As I knelt in prayer or sat silently in the sanctuary, I felt as though I were peeling away layers of noise, distraction, and doubt. On the evening of the 5th day, something shifted. The group had gathered for a time of worship, the room illuminated by the soft glow of candles. I closed my eyes, letting the music wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt utterly still, my thoughts quiet, my heart open. And in that stillness, I felt a peace that words couldn't capture. The next day, I woke up feeling unusually tired, more so than the fasting alone could explain. My chest felt heavy, my breaths shallow. I brushed it off, thinking it was just part of the physical toll of the retreat, but as the hours passed, the sensation didn't fade. By the evening of the 6th day, we gathered again for prayer. My body felt weak, but I pushed through, unwilling to miss the final moments of what had already been such a profound experience. I was seated in the back of the room when it happened. A sudden, sharp pain in my chest. The world around me seemed to tilt, and then everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the church anymore. I wasn't even sure I was in my body. The world around me glowed with an otherworldly light, and an overwhelming sense of love and peace washed over me. It felt familiar, like the place I had been 3 months before, but this time it was different. Before me stood Jesus, his presence radiant and powerful. His eyes held mine, and I felt as though he could see every part of me, every doubt, every fear, every hidden piece of my heart. Yet there was no judgment in his gaze, only love. Elizabeth, he say, shh. His voice gentle yet commanding. You have been faithful. Now, see what your obedience has begun. As he spoke, the world around us seemed to shift, and I found myself standing in a vast, endless space filled with shimmering lights. Each light pulsed with life, growing brighter and stronger, and as I looked closer, I realized they weren't just lights. They were people. I saw faces I recognized, friends, family, even strangers I had crossed paths with over the years. But there were also countless faces I didn't know, each one radiating with a joy that took my breath away. These are the lives your testimony will touch, Jesus said. Your obedience will inspire others to seek me, to pray, to fast, and to step into the calling I have for them. Tears filled my eyes as I watched the lights grow brighter, their radiance spreading outward. It was like watching ripples move across a still pond, each wave touching another, and another. I saw chains breaking, families being restored, and communities coming alive with hope and purpose. Then, the vision shifted again. This time, I saw groups of people gathered together, their hands lifted in prayer and worship. These weren't isolated moments of faith. They were united in purpose. Jesus showed me how corporate fasting, believers coming together with one heart and one mission, had the power to shake the foundations of darkness. I saw addictions being broken, illnesses healed, and strongholds shattered, not by individual strength, but through the collective faith of many. "You are preparing for a time of great trial," Jesus said, his voice filled with both urgency and assurance. "Fasting equips my people for what lies ahead. It strengthens their faith, sharpens their vision, and anchors them in me. Tell them, Elizabeth, tell them to prepare, not out of fear, but out of trust. I am with them, always." As his words settled in my heart, I felt a wave of peace unlike anything I had ever known. The brilliance of the light around us seemed to intensify, wrapping me in warmth and love. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the vision faded. When I woke up, I was back in the hospital, the now familiar hum of machines surrounding me. My body ached, and my chest felt sore. But my spirit was alive in a way it had never been before. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. When I was discharged from the hospital, the world felt different. Not because it had changed, but because I had. Every breath felt like a gift, every moment like an opportunity. The memories of what I had seen and heard during my second near-death experience were vivid, etched into my heart as if written in fire. The urgency to act, to share what I had been shown, pulsed through me like a drumbeat that wouldn't quiet down. At first, I didn't know where to begin. How could I explain something so extraordinary to people who hadn't seen it? What words could capture the weight of what I had experienced? For a few days, I wrestled with doubt. I worried about being misunderstood, judged, or dismissed. But every time I hesitated, I felt that same gentle yet insistent nudge in my spirit. "Speak," it seemed to whisper. "The message isn't yours to keep." One evening, as I sat at my kitchen table staring at a blank notebook, the thought hit me like a revelation. I didn't need to convince anyone or craft the perfect argument. My role was to share what I had witnessed and let God handle the rest. With that clarity, the fear began to fade. I started small. My first opportunity came when a friend from my church invited me to share my story at a women's Bible study group. It was a modest gathering, maybe 15 women in someone's living room. But the moment I began speaking, I felt something stir inside me. The words flowed as if they had been waiting to be spoken, and by the time I finished, the room was silent, tears glistening in many eyes. "That's exactly what I needed to hear," one woman said softly. Another nodded, her voice trembling as she shared how she had been praying for guidance about fasting, but felt too overwhelmed to try it. Hearing her say that reminded me of the ripple effects Jesus had shown me, the way one act of faith could inspire another and another, until it spread far beyond what we could imagine. Word began to spread, and invitations followed. I was asked to speak at small church gatherings, prayer groups, and even online forums. Each time, I prayed for the courage to simply be honest. I spoke about my initial doubts, the physical challenges of fasting, and the incredible spiritual clarity I had gained. But more than that, I shared the message Jesus had entrusted to me. Fasting isn't about deprivation or earning God's favor. It's about aligning ourselves with Him, tearing down spiritual barriers and stepping into a deeper relationship with the divine. One of the most memorable moments came during a Sunday service at a small church in Boulder. As I shared my story, I noticed a man sitting in the back row. his arms crossed tightly, his expression skeptical. I didn't let it distract me. I simply kept speaking, trusting that the message would reach whoever needed to hear it. After the service, the man approached me, his eyes filled with tears. "I've been running from God for years," he admitted, "but something about what you said, it broke through." It wasn't about me. None of it was. Every testimony I gave, every conversation I had, only deepened my understanding that I was merely a vessel. The power was his, not mine, and that truth humbled me in ways I couldn't describe. Online platforms became another avenue for sharing the message. With some encouragement from friends, I started posting short videos about my experiences and the lessons I had learned. At first, it felt awkward and vulnerable, speaking into a camera instead of to a room of people. But as comments and messages began pouring in, I realized the reach was far greater than I had imagined. People from all over the world shared how the videos had inspired them to start their own journeys of fasting and prayer. One woman from South Africa wrote to say that she and her husband had been struggling in their marriage, but after watching my video on the power of corporate fasting, they decided to fast together for 3 days. "We're talking again," she said, "really talking, for the first time in years. I can't thank you enough." Her words brought tears to my eyes, and I thought again of those ripples Jesus had shown me, the lights spreading across the earth, each one a life transformed. But it wasn't just others who were being changed. With every testimony I shared, I felt my own faith growing deeper. I saw how God could use even the smallest act of obedience to accomplish things far beyond what we could plan or predict. Each person who reached out, each story of breakthrough, was a reminder that this wasn't about me or my abilities. It was about Him. As the weeks turned into months, the urgency I felt didn't diminish. It only grew stronger. There was so much work to do, so many lives to touch. I found myself waking up each morning with a renewed sense of purpose, eager to see what doors God would open next. Whether it was speaking at a local community center or answering messages from strangers online, I approached every opportunity with the same prayer: "Let your will be done." Even as the momentum built, I remained mindful of the lesson Jesus had impressed upon me during my second NDE. Fasting isn't about the act itself, it's about the heart behind it. I reminded everyone I spoke to that fasting was a tool, a way to draw closer to God and align with His purposes. It wasn't about perfection or performance, it was about surrender. Looking back, I could see how far I had come from the hesitant woman who first stepped into that retreat, unsure of what she would find. Now, I walked with confidence, not in myself, but in the One who had called me to this path. And as I prepared for the next step in this journey, I knew without a doubt that He would continue to guide me, one step at a time. It wasn't long before the weight of my obedience began to feel heavier. The encouragement and gratitude from others kept me going, but there was another side to this journey, one I hadn't fully anticipated. The more I shared my story, the more I faced resistance, both from the outside world and from my own inner doubts. It started small, subtle remarks from friends who had always been supportive. A few questioned the validity of my near-death experiences, suggesting that perhaps it was just my mind playing tricks. "Maybe you were just in shock," one of my closest friends, Laura, said, her voice kind but laced with skepticism. "You know, the brain does funny things in those moments." I wanted to argue, to tell her that what I had seen was real, but instead I stayed silent. After all, she was my friend. She cared about me. But I also knew that she didn't understand, and in a way, I felt a chasm growing between us. It wasn't just my friends. Some of my family members were skeptical too. My brother, Mark, a devout Christian but a firm believer in science and logic, expressed his concerns. I believe in God, Liz, but I also believe in what's scientifically proven. Are you sure this experience wasn't just a result of a near-death state? I mean, how can we really know what's on the other side? His words hit harder than I expected, and I felt a pang of doubt in my chest. Maybe they were right. Maybe it had all been an illusion, a product of the trauma I'd experienced. As I continued to speak about fasting and its spiritual power, the questions became more pointed. "Isn't fasting a bit extreme?" one woman at a church gathering asked me. "I mean, it's one thing to pray and fast for a few days, but isn't this a little too much? You're asking people to push their limits." I could feel the judgment behind her words, and despite my best efforts, the sting of criticism settled deep within me. At times, I questioned myself. Was I being too bold? Was I overstepping by urging others to fast and pray, especially when my own journey had been so personal? In those moments of uncertainty, I would retreat into myself, looking for the strength to keep going. I spent hours in prayer, asking God to reaffirm the calling He had placed on my life. I would remember the powerful encounters I'd had in the spiritual realm, the moments when I had felt His presence so deeply. It was in those moments of communion with Him that I found the peace to carry on. But even prayer didn't always quiet the doubts. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was just fooling myself. The fear of failure loomed large, and the fear of rejection felt almost suffocating. What if I wasn't really hearing God's voice? What if this wasn't my calling at all? It was during one of those sleepless nights that I turned to fasting once again. I needed to feel connected, to hear God's voice more clearly. My own strength wasn't enough to silence the doubts. So, I set aside my own reservations and chose to fast for 3 days, not just for myself, but for clarity and guidance. I prayed for the courage to continue, no matter what others thought or said. I asked for a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper understanding of my calling. As the days passed, the struggle within me began to ease. I could feel the presence of God drawing near, and the peace that came with it was unmistakable. I realized that fasting wasn't just about physical discipline. It was about spiritual surrender. Every time I felt the hunger pangs or the weariness set in, I reminded myself that I wasn't just fasting for the sake of fasting. I was fasting to strengthen my relationship with God, to align my will with His. In those quiet moments, I felt His reassurance. It wasn't an audible voice, but an inner knowing, a deep sense of peace that whispered, "You are on the right path." I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. My obedience wasn't about convincing others. It was about remaining faithful to the calling I had received, no matter the cost. The doubts didn't completely disappear, of course. They still lingered, like shadows that would occasionally creep up when I least expected it. But each time I prayed or fasted, those shadows grew weaker. I began to trust in God's plan for me more and more, knowing that my obedience was enough. I didn't have to have all the answers or defend my experiences to everyone. God had called me, and that was all I needed to know. The resistance from others, while difficult, also taught me valuable lessons. I began to understand that not everyone would understand my journey, and that was okay. I couldn't control how others perceived me or my experiences, but I could control how I responded. And my response, I realized, had to come from a place of unwavering faith, not in myself, but in God's faithfulness. So, I kept going. I continued to share my story, even when the criticism stung, even when I wasn't sure how it would be received. And with each step, I felt God's strength filling me, His peace surrounding me, and His purpose guiding me. As I moved forward, I knew the struggles of obedience weren't over. There would be more challenges ahead, more moments of doubt and fear. But I also knew that I wasn't walking this path alone. And as long as I remained obedient, no matter the cost, I could trust that God would equip me for every challenge that lay ahead. As I stand before you today, sharing the final chapter of this journey, my heart is overwhelmed with gratitude. When I first started this path, I never could have imagined that my story would reach so many people. But now, after all the experiences, after seeing firsthand the way God has used fasting to transform lives, I understand more clearly than ever the power it holds. Fasting, as Jesus revealed to me, is not about earning God's love. We can't earn His love. He freely gives it to us. But fasting aligns our hearts with His purposes. It strips away distractions and helps us focus on what truly matters, on what He's calling us to do. In my experience, fasting isn't a way to gain favor from God, but rather a way to draw nearer to Him. It's about creating space for His voice to be heard in our lives and giving Him the room to shape us into the people He desires us to be. In the moments of silence during my fasts, I realized that the world is filled with darkness, spiritual darkness, and fasting is one of the most powerful tools we have to break those strongholds. It is through fasting that God's light breaks through into the dark places that need His healing touch. Whether it's in our own lives, our families, or in the world around us, fasting opens the door for God to move in mighty ways. It's like flipping a switch in a dark room and suddenly seeing things as they truly are. Fasting removes the veil and allows us to see through God's eyes. As I share this, I want you to hear my heart. The call to fast is urgent. We are living in a time when the world feels more uncertain than ever. There are challenges ahead, spiritual battles, personal trials, and shifts in society that we cannot ignore. Jesus made it clear during my time in His presence that fasting prepares us for these challenges. It strengthens us, equips us, and builds our spiritual resilience. As believers, we cannot afford to remain passive or complacent. We must rise up, prepare our hearts, and seek God with everything we have. Fasting is a way to spiritually prepare for what lies ahead, to stand firm and ready for whatever God has in store. But it's not just about preparing for the hard times. Fasting is an invitation to be part of the greatest move of God's Spirit. The revival that I saw during my second near-death experience was unlike anything I could have imagined. People from all walks of life were joining together, fasting and praying, and the result was a spiritual awakening that rippled across nations. People were healed, relationships were restored, and hearts were softened. That is what I believe is coming, an outpouring of God's Spirit, a time of revival that will change the course of history. And fasting, along with prayer, is the key to unlocking that move of God. We have the opportunity to be part of something incredible, something bigger than ourselves. It's an invitation to partner with heaven, to align ourselves with what God is doing in the world. And so, as I conclude my testimony, I want to leave you with this. Rediscover the transformative power of fasting. Don't view it as a burden or a duty, but as a profound act of faith. Fasting is a way to partner with God, to open the door for His will to be done in your life and in the world. It is through fasting that we allow God to break through the walls that we've built, and we invite His presence into every area of our lives. The journey I've shared with you isn't one that ends with me. It's one that continues through each of you. When I hear your stories, when I see how fasting is impacting your lives, it fills me with joy and hope. There is power in this discipline, and the results are far-reaching. So, I encourage you to embrace fasting, not just as an individual act, but as a community, as a church, and as the body of Christ. We are called to be agents of change, and fasting is one of the most powerful ways we can tap into that. As we prepare for what lies ahead, let us stand together, united in fasting and prayer, ready to receive all that God has for us. The greatest outpouring of His Spirit is coming, and we have the privilege of participating in it. Let us not miss the opportunity to partner with heaven in ushering in His light, His power, and His love to a world that so desperately needs it. Thank you for walking this journey with me. My prayer is that each of you will experience the transformative power of fasting, just as I have, and that, together, we will see God's Spirit move in ways we've never imagined, reaching people and places we never thought possible. The time is now. The call to fast is urgent. Let us rise up as one body and answer that call.